afternoon, Chief Brian Kane, Los Angeles County Fire Department. I'm here to talk about ready, set, go, and brush clearance, defensible space, and everything that relates to home hardening. So we'll go through the presentation, and then I'll take some questions afterwards, because I have a feeling there's going to be quite a few questions on this. So let's dive in. Okay, next slide, please. Okay, so ready, set, go basically refers to being ready, having a plan. Then when it's time to be ready, you get your set, and then you activate the plan that you came up for yourself, and then it's time to go. So some of these decision-making processes are going to be based on some of the things that we spoke about earlier presentation as it relates to evacuations, the information that you're getting from Alert South Bay, the information that you're getting from Genesis. All of those things are going to culminate together when you're going to activate your personal ready, set, go plan. Okay, there's three key elements as it relates to a public safety plan. So your preparation, you have the fire elements. What's the incident doing? What direction is it going? How big is it? What's the projected size of it? And is it actually affecting or going to impact your respective zone? So the peninsula is large. So there's broken down into many, many different zones. So just because there's an incident happening on the peninsula, that doesn't mean your respective zone is going to be impacted. So take that into account before you actually activate your plan. And of course, be ready for evacuation. So evacuation, once again, is based on some of those sites that we spoke about earlier. But then based on where you live and the geography around your neighborhood, have some predetermined routes of ingress and egress to which you might use if evacuation orders do come. So defensible space and home hardening is the first step as a homeowner to protect your home in case of wildfire. And of course, this is important this time of year as we are coming into what we consider to be the beginning of fire season. However, with local recent events and the weather systems the way that they are, we actually determined fire season is year-round now. We've already had some pretty significant wildfires in the region. So we do consider it to be year-round, but home hardening and defensible space is the first step as that kicks off on June 1st of every year. So defensible space, so we're going to dive really deep into this. So this is basically everything that you're going to do at your respective property from the perimeter of your house up to and including 200 feet, depending on the size of your property. So we're going to dive into how that's supposed to be cleared, the types of vegetation that you can have, what the first 5 feet is supposed to look like, the 10 feet, 50 feet, and so forth. And then, of course, home hardening. There are lots of things that you can do at your home to make it harden to wildfire. And individuals that put a lot of these things that we're going to talk about today into practice were the homes that were successful in some of the most recent wildfires that we saw. Outside, we have vendors that have these products, and you're going to hear me talk a lot about vents. So outside, there's multiple vendors that are selling ember-resistant vents. We're going to really dive deep into that soon, and I'll give you some reasons on why. So there's basically 4 categories if you break down home hardening. Your roof and rain gutters, ember entry points, back to the vents again, hazards within 5 feet, and defensible space beyond the 5-foot mark. Ember entry points. So the fires that we have in Southern California, especially the wildfires, the very, very aggressive fires, are wind-driven fires. So when we talk about fire weather severity, we talk about the red flag warnings, we talk about the red flag alerts. That all calculates into what we call the probability of ignition. So what we do is we take the values of humidity in both live and dead vegetation. We take those values, we plug them into a calculator with the relative humidity and the wind speeds and the temperatures of the day, and it will calculate a probability of ignition, which means how many of those embers that are flying through the air will land somewhere, which is basically a receptive fuel bed, and continue the fire to grow. Now, to give you an example, during the Palisades and the Eaton fire, we had weather predictions and probability of ignition of 100%. So each one of those embers were responsible for exponentiating the fire growth. But as it relates to your home, windows, exterior doors, garage doors, chimneys, open eaves, and vents are all entry points where these embers, especially driven by wind, can enter your respective home. So making sure that you have windows that are closed and sealed. If you have double pane windows, even better, because that will stop the heat element from making into combustible materials on the inside of the house. Exterior doors, making sure all of the seals are tight, that there's no air gaps, that a pressurized wind can force an ember through any of your closed doors. Chimneys, if you can remember in your Ready, Set, Go plan to close the flue. Now you won't have embers coming down the chimney that with wind behind it can then go outside of your fireplace and end up on combustible materials within your living area. Open eaves. So I had a discussion with a gentleman about open eaves. Now there's two types of open eaves. Open eaves that are just open with no attic space behind the eaves or under the eave. And then houses that have open eaves that have vents at the eave that leads into an attic space. Okay, so those are the most critical spots. Eaves with vents that lead to an attic space. That's where we see most of the critical entry points for these embers that are flying from very, very strong winds. This is why we have the products outside. So when those products are designed to encapsulate the eave when it is pressurized under the eave from entering the attic space itself. Very, very, very critical. And then, of course, vents. So if you're on a raised foundation, don't forget that there is vents that lead under your raised foundation. We have the vents on the eaves, and then some houses where there's a gable type of position, there is vents in those gables as well. All of those respective vents need to have ember encapsulating vents associated with them if you want to really, really harden your home. Roofs and rain gutters. So there's a lot of vegetation, a lot of big trees, very mature trees on the peninsula. Trees drop. We all know this. So it's critical that we keep the roof and the gutters clean of any of these dried, dropped fuels from these trees, as we consider these areas a receptive fuel bed. So once again, an ember that's flying through the air can get into your eave. Now your eave is, or your gutter, for example, with all those leaves in there. Now that rain gutter starts a fire. Now that fire gets onto your roof, gets into your attic, and then boom, there you have it. Windows, doors, and eaves, we talked about most of this already, and we're going to get into some of the more zone zero things that everybody has talked about, but also that first 5 feet from your house. As you can see on the rudimentary diagram here, things that are close to the house are going to be those that end up getting your house fully involved in fire should that receptive fuel bed take an ember. So any of the little bushes, any of the combustible decor, fences, decking, any of those types of things are areas where an ember can land and then start a fire. Vents. We just can't say enough about these vents, so I would really encourage everyone to peruse the vendors outside. Think about your house that you have and what kind of vents that you have there, what kind of eaves that you have, are they opened or closed? And you can see one example of some small holes. Those are vents that are going straight into the attic. Previous fire code only had a wire mesh on those holes, which we know is not as effective as some of these professional grade ember resistant vents that we have on the slide here. Critical zone. So this is an example. This was taken from the Palisades fire. And you can see here the firefighter aggressively trying to suppress the fire in that first 5 feet. So there's obviously a receptive fuel bed there where they had some ground cover that was taking the embers and then spreading the fire in that first 5 feet. So if all of that right there would have been hardscaped or non-combustible material, that firefighter would not be having to fight as aggressively as he is, trying to keep that fire there from going inside that house. So 0 to 5, extremely critical. And the fire code and defensible space is moving in that direction. And we will talk about zone 0 throughout this presentation, but first 5 feet is critical. Some examples of removing combustible and receptive fuel beds and replacing it with decorative hardscape. As you can see here, nothing next in the first 5 feet is now a receptive fuel bed. It's all been removed and replaced with decomposed granite, concrete, and rock and so forth. So the example that we saw before with all the fire right next to the walls could not happen at this house. And this is a great example. Another example of some home hardening in that first 5 feet. So once again, right next to the walls, the perimeter of the house, completely free of anything that could catch an ember and accelerate fire growth. Defensible space is maintaining space all around your house, not just the first 5 feet, but like up to and including 200 feet. And then there's parameters for the clearing and the vegetation as it moves away from your house. So the picture on the left, you can see not only is the first 5 feet clear, but even down the slope is also very, very sparse as it relates to anything combustible or anything that could burn that could lead up to that house. And you can see the firefighters on the right that are basically losing a battle with brush and combustible materials that weren't removed prior to their arrival. So everything that we're going to talk about is creating a buffer zone or a time lag for us to get there and to be able to start our structure protection. So the longer your house can survive with an oncoming wildfire before fire department arrival gives us that much more opportunity to save each respective home. So as a wildfire is progressing and growing, we are sending as many resources as we possibly can. Initial resources will go to what we call perimeter control or making the fire small. Subsequent resources go to structure protection. Okay, structure protection means we try to put one fire engine, usually for every 2 to 3 homes. Now, if your house has enough defensible space to thwart off an oncoming fire before we get there, that the likelihood of us being able to save your house increases dramatically. So that's the buffer zone that we need. That's the buffer zone that we're talking about. Give us that time to get our structured protection plan in place with these defensible space zones. And here's an illustration of what those zones look like. Zone 1 is up to 30 feet. Zone 2 spreads out to 70 feet. And for a total of 100 feet in certain areas, depending on the size of your lot. So we're looking at thinning of all vegetation. We're looking at limbing up trees, so they're at least 6 feet off the ground, the limbs, to inhibit the fuels from raising up a tree and then spreading out laterally. We're looking at that first zone 1 and zone 0 to be very, very limited on vegetation or anything combustible. Again, another illustration of what vegetation should look like in each of these respective zones. So you can see the zone 0, nothing. Zone 1, 5 to 20 feet, very, very, very limited. As we move out, you can increase the vegetation and the growth between each, but we still look for a separation of, even at the furthest range of 100 feet, at least 6 feet apart, and then that distance increases as we move closer to the structure. So as we get 30 to 60 feet from the structure, we want to see a 12-foot separation, and as we get 30 feet from the structure, we want to see up to an 18 feet of separation. So separation buys us time, and it inhibits fire growth and spread. So now that we've learned a little bit about defensible space and some home hardening, it's now time to prepare a wildfire action plan, which is basically the Ready, Set, Go program. So having a plan at your respective home with your documents, your go bag, your medications, anything that you need that is set in a place for you to leave very, very quickly is what we're looking to do. So a good way to do this is like a roller suitcase. Like if you have a roller suitcase that is by your front door that is already contained with a lot of the things that you're going to need should you have to leave your house in short notice, is a great way and a great start to get ready. Having all of your documents in either backed up electronically or stored at multiple different locations. Now, I'll tell you that the question that I get is a fireproof safe. So this is very interesting. A fireproof safe won't burn, but that doesn't keep the heat out of the interior of the safe. So I have opened safes that were fireproof, and everything inside was basically burnt from just from the heat. So even cash, jewelry was melted, watches were destroyed, documents destroyed, just from the heat. Now the safe looked fine, but it couldn't. The interior of the safe couldn't handle the amount of heat that it took. So we're also talking about not only having your plan ready, but also practicing your plan. Especially, June 1st would be a great time as brush inspections, defensible space inspections are coming, is to revisit your plan. Is the plan still adequate? Is there anything that needs to be added to your plan? Like, do you have new medications? Do you have new documents? Do you have new heirlooms or whatever that you have to collect before you would leave that structure? So annually it should be reviewed, and June 1st would be a great time to do that. So here we are, we're talking about the papers again. I can't tell you how many times I've been on incidents and after subsequent days following a wildfire, and homeowners are asking, can you please try to find this? I had some very important stuff in that corner. Can you please go and see it? It's not replaceable, or very important, whatever. So those types of things should either be in your go bag or stored in a place that cannot be affected by a wildfire. Go early. So once again, I want to revisit Alert South Bay. So for those of you that weren't here in the morning session, Alert South Bay is a application that is cellular based, that is all of the information that you would want to have as a resident of the peninsula should an incident be taking place. So it's free, it's prescription based. You basically sign up and you can set it up to give you alerts daily, or when it's just in your area or in your city, however you'd like it to be. But that is where the emergency managers and the incident commanders are going to be putting their information in real time during an incident. So if you want to know anything about evacuation routes, shelters, the progress of the incident, the growth of the incident, affected areas, anything like that, you will find it in Alert South Bay. The other one is the Genesis program. Now, Genesis is an information platform, but also an evacuation platform. So hopefully you took some time to notice the map out in the foyer there that's of the peninsula, and the peninsula is basically broken down in a grid, and that grid has respective zones on it. So the fire department and law enforcement is going to use those zones as it relates to the incident, information that needs to be disseminated, and evacuations, whether it's a warning or an order or a shelter in place. All of that information will be placed in Genesis within those respective zones in real time as the incident is progressing and evolving. Those zones will change colors. So the color will tell you that something's happening in zone, for example, RPV 123, it'll change color. That tells you like, ooh, something's happening there. You can click on that zone and it'll bring up exactly what's happening. And each of us in here that live on the peninsula have a zone assigned to your residence. So it's very important that you know what zone you're in. And even the zones that are around your zone, your neighboring zones. So a neighboring zone might have an incident. It's not in your zone, but it's close to you. It might be a good idea to know what's happening in the zone next to you, because that problem could migrate to your zone next. This is also how we're going to do evacuations. So Evacuations, to be successful, need to be done systematically. So we want to do evacuation warning and then move to an order. And then everything will keep leapfrogging as the incident progresses. So an order, so for example, here would be an evacuation order, there would be a warning, then warning turns to order, and you just keep leapfrogging it down. That's how we will evacuate, to keep the streets and the road systems free and clear, to allow the traffic to keep flowing and to allow emergency resources to come into the incident. And of course, it gives you the best chance of surviving, and it gives you the best chance of getting everything out of your house that you would like to get out before the incident gets to your respective home. We talked about this, the traffic systems. I think we all have a pretty good idea of what happened in the Palisades incident, where the road system became overwhelmed from evacuation. Now that was a little bit different as it was such a fast-moving incident, but going early will help everything. So on the peninsula, this question comes up quite a bit. There's a lot of horses. So anyone that has large animals or any animals, this is also a time where you would need to have a plan for those respective animals. Even if you have, dogs and cats, house animals, what is your plan if an evacuation order comes? Not all shelters are equipped to take animals, so it'd be a good idea to have a plan of where you're going to go if you do have animals at home. Horses. I've heard some figures. I don't want to reiterate those figures because I could be wrong, but I know that there is nowhere near enough horse trailers on the peninsula for the amount of horses that are on the peninsula. So what is your plan if any of us here have horses? What is your plan for that animal in a situation like this? Where are you going to go? How are you going to potentially evacuate your animal as well? There has been instances in past practice where even before an evacuation warning comes, those individuals that do have large animals are notified first. Like, okay, if you have large animals, you need to get your truck and your trailer and your horse loaded. Okay, you need to get going even before an evacuation warning comes. All that information will be disseminated to you via either Genesis or South Bay Alert. Okay, we've been pretty much touching on this throughout the presentation. Next slide. So all of this information that we just talked about we have some of it out at the table in the front, and any of this can be accessed at www.fire.lacounty.gov. There's a tremendous amount of resources there, both digital and video. You can watch how to harden your home. You can watch videos of a house that hasn't been hardened versus a house that has been hardened, and an equal time lag on which one gets going first and how the one doesn't even catch fire. So there's a lot of examples of best practice and how those best practices, when put into practice, are very, very successful.